Hi there. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I'm so grateful that you're here to my humble little channel, Catalyst Energies. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you so much. So welcome to this full moon forecast where we go over the main astrological themes for the next 2 weeks from our upcoming full moon in Pisces, exact on the 28th, roughly around midnight Eastern Standard Time on the 28th of August, up to our next new moon, which will be on the 10th of September. A pretty intense day astrologically and otherwise that we'll get to talk all about in just a couple of weeks. But right now, we're going to focus on the main themes from our full moon, which also incidentally is a almost total lunar eclipse. So we're still in the midst of this eclipse corridor. We had a total solar eclipse on the 12th of August, and now it is technically a partial lunar eclipse. There is a sliver of actual abated moonlight that we're going to get, but for the most part, the entirety of the moon is within the Earth's umbra or shadow. So we're going to talk about the significance of the full moon, the fact that it's eclipsed, the energy surrounding it, and then looking at, as I said, the main themes moving forward. Also, too, we are going to look at some current events and do a little walk back to observe and to confirm the astrological and civilizational significance of some current events. One current event in particular. And I'm going to tell a little story about how I personally came to start researching and observing the details of this particular event and the public response and reaction to it. And then we're going to look at the astrological significance of this event with the current and recent astrology and how absolutely pivotal this event and the public response to it is for moving forward at a civilizational level. So I haven't really picked the title as of this recording for this transmission, but the title in my head in terms of this particular current event, and it is really not to make light of this situation whatsoever, but it is to make a point. And the title in my head was, so what is in Barbalt's basket? Surprise! It's Lindsay Clancy. So we're going to talk about this trial. We're going to talk about the astrology, and I assure you, there's no shortage of people out there in the interweb social media sphere that are utilizing astrology to make all kinds of claims about what has or has not happened, who is and who isn't responsible. I am not here to do that. I am here to point out the observational data when it comes to the astrology, the people involved, and the events, and how that is a marker, at least to me, that whatever the fallout of this particular trial and everything surrounding it is going to have long-lasting impacts. Now, of course, just an eclipse cycle in and of itself has long-standing and deep impact because you're talking astrologically about an event that has an impact on the evolution at the soul level. It's very karmic. It is something that is deeply embedded in the soul journey of everyone right now, and is not something that is going to fully realize itself until the end of the cycle, which is an eclipse cycle is roughly about 6 months. And so for those of you who are my subscribers, hello, welcome back. And of course, Catalyst membership. And I'm going to talk about the reading, the energy reading we just did as well, is all part of this conversation. You may have noticed that I didn't actually put up any content for the total solar eclipse. And that's because I had created content and did a transmission for a seasonal forecast for the entire eclipse season. And that's something that was available to the Catalyst membership as part of their monthly subscription benefit. And I did send out a discount code to my email list for 50% off for those who want to purchase that. So that's still available. If you listen to this and you feel like, yeah, I really do want to get a sense of what that 6-month forecast has in store for us in terms of the astrology and the deeper soul-oriented and karmic significance, then you can still purchase that. And if you have not opened that email, if you're on my email list but you didn't open the email, that discount code is still viable. You can still use it, and you just go to the website. Everything you need is in the description box below. So I'm going to share with you the flyer. That way you know exactly what you're looking for if in fact you are interested in getting the 6-month forecast. But that's why there isn't a new moon total solar eclipse forecast. So This is the flyer, Eclipse Season Forecast through the Lionsgate, because not only did we have an eclipse cycle in Leo and Aquarius, it also was very much lined up with the 8/8 Lionsgate. So all of that information is part of this forecast. You can go to the store at catalystenergies.net and purchase that, and then you get a dedicated link that takes you to the video. So, okay, let's start here, because in case some of you are here just to get the deets. Another piece of information about what's happening with this trial with Lindsay Clancy, and you could, care less about the full moon and the astrology attached to it. Although I would say it's probably really important that you do listen to it because it's all relative. This information, this trial in particular, was not on my radar until, oddly enough, I was in Massachusetts during the eclipse. I was there on family vacation. We were on Cape Cod. It was the first time we had ever vacationed in Cape Cod for the summer like that, so it was lovely. But, something grabbed my attention while I was in Massachusetts. So in case you're not aware, this is actually the state that the crime took place, and so this is where the trial is happening. And another piece of information also, another event had happened in Massachusetts also during this time, very congruent actually with the solar eclipse, only 2 days before. So right between the Lionsgate and the total solar eclipse, another event happened. The governor of Massachusetts signed some type of legislation, some sort of law to protect late-term abortion. So, and I'm not here to get into a debate or an argument or conversation about my personal opinion about these issues, okay? Because they're my opinions. And I'm not here to share that. I'm here to share the astrology. So before I looked at any astrology, other than the fact that I knew that the solar eclipse in Leo was happening, I had done my whole forecast about it and had a general sense of like, okay, what's coming down the pipeline here? And for those of you who did listen to or watch the video, then you were very aware of what I had talked about. The histrionics around this event are right in line with the symbolism of this particular solar eclipse. So those two things were not lost on me as I was in Massachusetts. It prompted me to start paying attention, but I did not look at any astrology related to the case. I said, okay, X, I'm going to let you and your algorithm completely inundate me with posts about this issue. I wanted to hear all sides of it, and not just the facts of the case, but I was particularly interested in the response and the reactions and the diversity of opinion. That's what I wanted, and that's what I observed. That was the research I did. I just collected raw data around this time as this trial has been unfolding, and I've continued to do so, and really tracking the trending of responses and reactions and opinions around this particular issue, okay? So it wasn't until I got back from vacation and settled back into my workflow, really started having my brain get much more oriented back into reading and astrology, that I decided, okay, it's time to start pulling up some charts related to this case. And so first point is, if you remember Barbalt's basket, I did a whole video about it. You can go back on my channel and listen to it. Lo and behold, the day that this trial started was the day that Barbalt's basket was exact. Okay, so that in itself is enough right there to be like, okay, the outcome of this trial and everything surrounding it is going to have, and is already having, but will definitely have civilizational implications, right? Okay. Then I looked at the natal chart of Lindsay Clancy. And like I said, there is so much garbage out there right now in terms of people utilizing astrology to project their opinion or their own personal shit onto this situation, which is very irresponsible. I'm really glad that I did not know these things at the time, because then it did not influence my read on these astrological transits. Barbalt's basket, the Lionsgate, and the solar eclipse, right? The full moon lunar eclipse is a different story, because now I know and I'm enmeshed in it. And in fact, that actually tracks really well with the energy of a Pisces full moon, because you are swimming in the collective unconscious at that point. There is really no separation between you and everything else with a moon in Pisces. But the fact that it's going to be mostly eclipsed suggests too that we feel the entirety of that full moon in Pisces, but the illumination and clarification of purpose from the new moon will not be fully realized. The sun is illuminating what otherwise is within us. It's something we feel. These full moons bring that all up to the surface to be seen. While when the moon is eclipsed by the shadow of the earth, it is distorted. We feel it just as much, but we are not seeing things clearly. And at least in this case, there's going to be a sliver of light with this partial lunar eclipse. So going back, though, to the natal chart of Lindsay Clancy. So there were two particular pieces of information that really caught my attention. And I'm sure if I wanted to deep dive into this particular person and do a full reading on them, I'm sure we could gather more information. But the two things in relation to this trial and to the current astrology are as follows. Number one, we had a full moon in Aquarius on July 24th. So Barbalt's basket was exact on the day that the trial started. Then there was a full moon in Aquarius in 7 degrees Aquarius. Opposite of that was the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. That was on Lindsay Clancy's natal nodal axis, right? So her own personal nodal axis, the trajectory of her soul, right? The pathway of the soul's evolution, which is the nodes of the moon, the full moon was highlighting the north node of this individual. So there's the second piece of information, that her role in this is wrapped up in her and her soul's evolution as well, where she's been and where she's going. I would say that there is some significant karma involved with this individual at a soul level, right? And that's why they are in this position. And the third piece of information that really lends itself to this conclusion on my part is the fact that Lindsay Clancy is a Leo sun. And in fact, her solar return was on August 11th, right before the solar eclipse. Okay, so those particular pieces of information said to me, this event and the person involved is going to, again, have civilizational implications, moving not just forward over the next 6 months because it's wrapped up in this eclipse cycle, but much larger implications because of Barbalt's basket, right? Which is a major astrological transit that is focusing on all the outer planets being in this basket or cradle formation. That's why I was like, what's in Barbalt's basket? You know, surprise, it's Lindsay Clancy. So, and not really her, but everything surrounding this event. So, taking all of that into consideration, how important the response of it. So I did a reading for the membership on Friday, not really intending initially to be focusing on this issue, because at the time I thought, well, this is something I'm supposed to be focusing on for something within me, right? There's something here that my attention's being drawn to these particular issues, because it's not just the trial, it's the legislation in Massachusetts that was signed pretty much as this was really starting to come out into the public awareness. And I thought, you know, this is something that I'm exploring. There's something here for me in particular. But when I started looking at the astrology of the trial and the individual involved in particular, I started to realize, okay, I do have to address this in a more general or public way, because this is having an impact on all of us, and not just all of us, but society as a whole. So when I did my reading for the Catalyst membership, I'm not going to go into the reading because that's their benefit, of course, but I will say that the two phrases that I think may encompass the reading as a whole, number one is be careful what you wish for. And number two, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So there's lots of conversation that needs to happen. The conversation about mental health, about women's mental health, about accountability, big pharma, all of these things. These are all conversations that will be ongoing. And my concern personally was like, wow, there's going to be a precedent set here that's going to, again, have long-standing implications at the societal level. I'm very concerned, but I'm also just going to continue to step back into the witness and observer mode and keep myself emotionally grounded as we go through this process together. Right? So again, be careful what you wish for, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And as we finish this fire horse year, we're in the second half now, we're going to move into the fire goat year next, which will also be congruent with another eclipse cycle. The Chinese New Year in February will also be exactly lined up with another set of eclipses. So again, there's going to be just as much significance to next year as there is this year. So when you think about the Chinese zodiac, similar to ours, there's 12 animals. The horse from the goat is like Sagittarius to Capricorn, from the 9th house to the 10th house. And the 9th house is about those lofty ideals and beliefs. It's about the philosophy and the understanding that is generated, oftentimes wisdom, right? A sense of doctrine. But there is a dark side to that, which is a challenged belief system, right? That you just believe without having any like actual knowledge. Maybe your knowledge is flawed. And that is why there is a warped understanding. That can be part of the 9th house as well. There is a lot of optimism and a lot of big picture ideas. Well, Capricorn is when those ideas and that social value starts to crystallize. Sagittarius can often be like just blowing a lot of hot air. And I say that truly as a stellium Sagittarius person. My sun is in Sagittarius. I have a ton of Sagittarius. I know how to work with this energy and where the blind spots are. And the Sag into Capricorn, or in the case of Chinese zodiac, the horse into the goat, the broad horizons, the beliefs, as they crystallize into structure and institutions, that's where the rubber's really going to meet the road, right? So this is a pretty pivotal moment. What happens here is going to ripple out for a long time and is actually going to be kind of the container in which society is going to continue to crystallize or burn it all to the ground. That was the other thing too. Like that's, if it needs to all come down because it's corrupt at the root, then that's what's going to happen as well with the year of the fire goat. There's no messing around with the goat, right? It is getting down to brass tacks. And strangely enough, the second lunar quarter that we're going to talk about, it has a lot of Saturn involved. Most of the personal planets and the sun are going to make different aspects with Saturn within the next 2 weeks. And so that's really where I'm going to focus. And Saturn retrograde is much more about of an internal determination, persistence, authority structure. And when you have a planet that is retrograde, it is internalized. Sometimes it is inverted, and oftentimes it just gives an opportunity to kind of review those things in the retrograde, meaning that Saturn in its direct motion, which is going to be happening early December, and go back over all this territory, actually pounding the gavel. You know what I mean? Saturn is the judge. It is the definitive last word on things. And so the retrograde is a perfect time to assess for ourselves what that last word is internally. What are our internal institutional structures? What is crystallizing? And in the sign of Aries, we're talking about our own initiative, our own sense of desire and potential, and the courage to actually initiate that. That can go really badly if something is out of whack in terms of the ego, and that's called a personality disorder, isn't it? I'm going to take you back to Barbalt's basket, actually, because I want to review that and give everyone here a visual of that, just in case you didn't see it in the previous transmission that I did talking about this, because I did talk about it in terms of the Aquarius full moon and everything along with that too. So just to kind of review, here's Barbalt's basket. You can see that the major opposition that creates the top of the basket, right? The brim, so to speak. This is the deck of the ship, right? Barbalt's basket is the ship that we're waiting for. And again, be careful what you wish for, because when that ship does come in, you got to get on it. And, if it's corrupt or if it has some sort of issue with it, too bad. That's going to be the year of the fire goat. So we have some time. I think Saturn in its retrograde, I think all the outer planets in their retrograde, including Chiron, is exactly what we need in order to reassess some of the themes associated with all of these outer planets, about our spiritual ideal with Neptune, our institutional authority, that's Saturn, and our responsibility too, that's also Saturn. Pluto, the raw power of the soul to transform. The fact that Chiron is now retrograde and will go back into Aries. So there's still some more work to be done in terms of those inner wounds of self that Chiron and Aries represents. And just before I forget, and I've been wanting to make this statement again, because I think it's even more pertinent now, I had talked about at some point in the recent past, I said that the millennial generation, so I look at these generations as where Pluto is, right? Pluto in the chart represents the soul's power of transformation that's already here, with the soul, comes in at birth. The individual soul wants to establish balance and evolution through the nodes of the moon and Pluto's oppositional point. The Pluto and Scorpio people are primarily the millennials for the most part. And Chiron coming into Taurus, opposite of all of that, there's going to be a really hard time. Gen X has just gone through. We know full well what it feels like because you basically have to address the wounds so you know what is healable and what isn't, what has to just be given back to source and released, right? What do we have to give up? Just like Chiron, in order to heal, he had to give something up. He had to give up his immortality, right? It was the thing that defined him. It made him who he was. He had to give it up in order to heal from a wound that was not going to heal. And boy, oh boy, good luck, guys. I'm just saying that Chiron moving through Taurus is going to be a rough road for the millennials because you have to come to terms with what is, and especially when you're going to talk about Taurus, you're talking about inherently what is, objective reality. When the millennials are absolutely primed and already familiar at a soul level with the elements of power and transformation, right? Pluto and Scorpio is very deep and very powerful. But there is this part of Chiron and Taurus that is like, you have to accept what is first. You have to address what is and accept what is in order to then take what is and transmute it into something more. And without that recognition, it's going to be very difficult. So that's my 2 cents about Chiron and Taurus for the millennials. It's going to be rough. And it was rough for the Gen Xers, right? We already went through it. So, and there'll be a little bit left. There'll be a little bit left with Chiron going back into Aries during this time. But I just wanted to point that out. That's been really sitting on my mind for a little while. Chiron is a big part of this seasonal eclipse forecast. Chiron and the nodes of the moon continue to come around as part of these astrological configurations that provide a lot of stress and tension surrounded by opportunities to transform. It's all throughout, especially up until November, the astrology. And in fact, during this next 2 weeks, we're going to find the first big mystic rectangle right before the next new moon, so at the balsamic moon phase, that is going to present itself. So that'll be kind of the capstone here of this particular forecast. So here's Barbalt's basket. Like I said, Jupiter and its opposition with Pluto in Aquarius, and then the sun comes to meet Jupiter, and then we have the full moon that again is conjunct Pluto on the 24th. So, but this was exact on the 20th when this trial with Lindsay Clancy started. So what's coming in on this ship? You know, be careful what you're wishing for. Be mindful of what the fruits of that are going to yield. This is our chart for the upcoming Pisces full moon. It will be a slightly partial lunar eclipse, meaning that most of the moon will be within the umbra or the main shadow of the earth. You can go to timeanddate.com and search around for eclipses, and you can get a lot of good information on the path of totality, which is going to cover primarily the Western Hemisphere. And also you can get like a live feed of what it's going to look like. There's a little glimmer of hope that something will be clarified and illuminated, but just remember that it's not the full picture, and we will feel the entirety of the collective unconscious with a Pisces full moon regardless. It just will not be fully illuminated at that time, okay? Now, the other piece of this that is really important, there's 2 pieces. One, if you look in the chart here, you'll see that the Sun and Mercury are in a cazimi at this time. That means they are conjunct in Virgo. So Virgo is actually one of the home territories of Mercury because Virgo is very analytical. It's very organized. You put things where they belong. You are consistent with the steps that need to happen in order to accomplish something. So in Virgo energy, you're very focused on putting things where they belong, being organized, being meticulous, right? Some people on the dark side of Virgo tend to be very controlling. The starseed marking for Draco is in the sign of Virgo right now. Draco is really wrapped up in this particular full moon lunar eclipse. And there actually is quite a bit of galactic energy involved, not only with this lunar eclipse, but the fact that Saturn is at a position that is aligned with the main star in the Andromeda constellation. So that is something for a starseed oriented transmission. I would absolutely love to do something very focused on there. If you are receiving a personal eclipse forecast, and by the way, if you're waiting for that, you have not been forgotten, I promise. I really just wanted to get this out in order to organize my own thoughts, in order to give a comprehensive picture to those who are getting the personal 6-month forecast. But that's something I would focus on in a personal reading as well, is the starseed connection. And there's plenty of it here, a lot. So you have the Sun and Mercury conjunct in a Cazimi, right? This is very sharp intellect, mental alertness just in general. And the fact that it's in the sign of Virgo, which is one of Mercury's home territories, I would say that it has more to do with being very focused and meticulous. There's a patience and a discipline that comes along with Virgo. So in the 6th house, for instance, which is the Virgo house, I mean, this is where you know, the rubber meets the road in terms of our individual efforts, right? This is where a hobby turns into a practice. This is where the joy of children turns into a routine of care, right? This is where you institute a spiritual practice and stick with it. This is where your work responsibilities and your duties on a daily basis reside, in the 6th house. This is where your new dietary and nutritional regimen is in the 6th house. You're healing, right? The 2nd house in Taurus might be the state of your health, but the 6th house in Virgo is your healing. So you have these two together at the full moon. Then it's in a T-square, as you can see, this red triangle with Uranus in Gemini. Now, granted, this is all mutable energy. Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces are mutable signs. It means they're malleable, they're changeable. Things can shift and be flexible depending on how we are impacted or how we perceive things, right? And so when you have something like a square or a T-square, especially T-square, because that apex down at Uranus is the way out of the energy of an opposition. And the fact that it's a full moon opposition, that is an eclipse, in and of itself is going to be challenging, I think, because there is this Mercury-Sun conjunction, I think, that really wants to be very much in control of our thought and in control of that which we are perceiving. Right? 4 to 5 degrees Virgo is about what is normally unseen is being seen. And if you extract that into more mundane language, it's really just, you know, an outlook that has to do with seeing things that you don't normally see. The eclipsed full moon in Pisces represents that the ability for every type of event, every type of practice, every type of interchange in a society is important. A religion, for instance, right? If we're going to take the spiritual aspect of Pisces, a religion, it makes a society whole because it makes it holy or sacred, right? And in a more mundane way, it's like, you know, everything has its place. Everything has its significance, right? And that might be very difficult to really see clearly with a lunar eclipse like this, even with Mercury involved in Virgo, because it's going to really want to control how we see these things and where we put these new revelations, for instance. The T-square to Uranus is going to be what gets us. And it's not necessarily a terrible thing, but talk about like hidden truths coming out, talk about unexpected information with Uranus and Gemini. That's all going to be part of this eclipse. And also to keep in mind that it's not going to be a one-off. It might be something at the time that really sets things off, that, you know, things come out that were completely unexpected, because that's the nature of Uranus, and especially information, ideas, the way we communicate, how we think about things, what we think about things, that's all Gemini energy. Maybe there is a freedom involved here. Maybe this is where we do get out of the confusion of the eclipse and the discomfort of seeing things that we haven't really seen before. I feel like that this trial and everything surrounding it actually is in fact bringing things out of the shadows that we didn't realize were actually there for a lot of people. So this Uranus T-square, I think, is giving us a place to really release that energy and release ourselves, find some sort of freedom from what otherwise would be very confusing and intense energy. You know, with a Pisces full moon, you can really just kind of drown in the collective unconscious. You don't know what's yours and where you end and everybody else begins. And that becomes even more of a problem with social media consumption on a regular basis. So there is this trigger point. Truly, this T-square and the energy associated with it will take us out throughout the next 6 months into the next eclipse cycle. So that's something to consider as the initial foundation here of this lunar eclipse, is this T-square with Uranus. Now, what I'd like to focus on, and like I said, is the connection to Saturn as we move through the next 2 weeks, okay? Because, again, it is our internal sense of authority and responsibility to ourselves and everything that comes from the projection of ourselves and our personality. That's what this Saturn retrograde is really going to hold us accountable to. And I do feel like it's really important that we utilize this opportunity to reassess. And in fact, there's a lot of language in these different transits that we're going to go through that actually leads the individual to do that, to have strategic reassessment. And you're seeing that a lot in terms of lots of different things. Relationships, for instance, a lot of reassessing relationships as a result of people's reactions, their opinions, their responses, their behaviors. So strategic reassessment. All right, so the first one I want to look at is actually right after the lunar eclipse. And so that's on the 31st of August. That is going to be a trine with our friend Jupiter in Leo. The moon has moved on actually into Aries. So this is also important because the moon will be in Aries and conjunct Saturn as these transits are happening. So the first one I want to address is Jupiter in a trine to Saturn retrograde. Now, oftentimes trines, because they don't pose any challenge or risk or friction, they can kind of make you a little complacent. Now, this is a fire trine, so it also can be very foundational and supportive of creative energy, of output, of action, but that's not always a good thing that the output may be supported without any friction in order to get us to really question or feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel very comfortable, right? So 14 Leo, a human soul seeking opportunities for outward manifestation. Just think you're getting close to the degree of the Lion's Gate. So this is getting to a point where the heart kind of is just so full that the soul is ready to release itself through whatever expression we find ourselves engaged in when we're talking about Leo, right? The heart's expression. So Jupiter and Leo. 14 Aries, and I really want to focus on this degree because this is where Saturn is now and will make all these different connections. And in galactic astrology, 13, 14 degrees is usually an indication of a strong connection to starseed origins. Right? 14 Aries is the star in the head of Andromeda, the constellation. So Saturn sitting here is also really activating this Andromeda kind of starseed set of traits as well. That's why it's really useful to have something like the starseed reading, because it helps you identify those types of traits within your overall blueprint. So, and I don't want to go over all the Andromedan traits here because that's something that I do individually with people. 14 Aries, and that degree is a serpent coiling near a man and a woman. So it represents the ritualization of relationship, that it's in the contrast of relationship that the understanding is released, right? That there is a revelation that we come to understand and to know by bringing opposing positions together. You can see right now that there is this contention between fundamentally men and women right now, and the serpent coiling near them can have a lower or transient impulse associated with it, or it could have an exceptional self-discipline when it comes to the control of that very potent Kundalini energy that is generated when you bring together two opposing forces. This particular trine, Jupiter trine Saturn, in its retrograde, is allowing for sustained effort and endurance in sustained effort. You can stay focused on like long-term goals, avoiding distractions from day-to-day dramas. Boy, there's plenty of that right now. Your broad perspective, strong sense of duty, it means you'll be productive and efficient, and your efforts will enhance your stability and your security. And these efforts, again, endurance, patience, not getting distracted by day-to-day drama, eye on the prize. And when your efforts enhance your stability and security, you can feel a sense of pride and satisfaction, which is very much the Leo energy as well. Be very clear about your goals and being very purposeful about them, right? If challenges arise, find practical solutions. Stay focused on the long term, the long game. And again, this is part of the strategic reassessment, because if you just start to discover that there's corruption in how you are personally engaging with contrast or with contention, if you were able to assess where there are some problems, this also allows you to be willing to take on responsibility. There's just a sliver of actual illumination. It's like swimming in the ocean in the dark, right? You don't know what is going on. You just know you're in the water, but you can't see anything. You don't know where anything is. You don't know what's going on underneath you. You're just a bobber in the dark ocean. So it's very difficult to get your bearings. So from here, there are these stability factors, especially Saturn, that is going to give us something to anchor to. So instead of launching something brand new right now, this is a period for internal review, like I said, and reassessing your past plans, refining the foundations you've already built, right? Things might have to change. And maybe, again, you start to see things that you didn't realize were there. You start to become aware of what otherwise has remained hidden under the surface. And now you're like, oh, I can really feel that. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I want to make sure my foundations are refined and they're strong. Jupiter in Leo, it gives a lot of purpose and meaning to our own yearning for manifestation, whatever that is for each of us individually. Now, right after this, it's going to be questioned right away and challenged. And that's because Mars is going to come into a square with Saturn right after this. Again, another starseed activation, because Mars will be conjunct the star Sirius. I would say that Mars in a square to Saturn, while Mars is conjunct Sirius, is where the challenge is going to come from. We're acting on how we feel with Mars in Cancer. That's pretty obvious right now. And at 14 degrees Cancer, it represents like this permanence in truth. It's this sense of fulfillment in something that is changeless and transcendent. And there's an absoluteness associated with it, with this particular degree of Cancer. It's the old man facing the dark space. There's a permanence in the truth of the void, of the space within. This degree represents a very highly effective enlistment of deeper and hidden elements of life. What does that mean? Tapping into those deeper and hidden elements and utilizing them for something purposeful. And Mars is always acting. So Mars wants to act according to how we each individually feel, and especially in terms of a purpose, right? And something that is changeless and transcendent. So it meets Saturn in this square, and it's in its retrograde, and all of a sudden, superiors, right? Father figure, other dominant men, teachers, bosses may put you down, restrict your ambitions, and generally stop you from achieving what you want. Now, the question here is, what is it that you want? Because there's always a dark side to all of these degrees in the zodiac, and the dark side is lack of purpose and chaos. If you are not emotionally grounded, then this degree where Mars is has people acting on how they feel, and how they feel is probably being conditioned by something not their own sense of inner integrity, or maybe you think it is. So the Saturn retrograde, again, coming in and being the brick wall, restriction. General circumstances might just prevent your progress. It may not be a specific authority figure. It may not be a dominant man. It may not be a boss. It might be your internal power structure and authority coming in and really putting the brakes on things. So there's frustration, there's inhibition. And you'll find it increasingly challenging to express your passion. So you have the trine with Saturn, and then right after you have a Mars squaring Saturn. And that's more of just like, if the harder you push, the more resistance you're going to face, okay? And so this is not a winning transit, right? The best thing to do if you have to do anything is to have a defensive approach instead of going on the offense, all right? Instead of starting something new, focus on holding on to what you have. That's very reminiscent of what I just said about Jupiter and Saturn in the trine, right? That you assess what you have instead of launching into something new. Rejection or limitation for this square can internalize the intense energy of Mars, which can be problematic. If the frustration and the anger, if it's not expressed safely, can cause some serious issues. So risk-taking, bursts of energy, anger, it can really exacerbate existing problems. So this is not a good time to fight or to conquer new ground, right? This is a great time to sharpen your blades and strengthen your defenses. And so take that for what it's worth and realize here that from the full moon and even that T-square with Uranus that's just going to be intense on multiple levels, there is in the background this inner authority that is really keeping us honest and responsible, but also giving us persistence and determination to maintain in the long run. The sun will then come into a quincunx with Saturn just a few days after that. So we're going to look ahead to the 5th, and you can still see that there's lots of energy happening early September that is going to be impactful, but I want to keep on with this focus on Saturn. And also, too, you can see Mars and Lilith are about to come into an opposition. And that's going to be important, too, when we come into the 9th, which will be our balsamic moon, and right before our Virgo new moon. Here's the sun in Virgo. It's going to quincunx or in conjunct with Saturn as well, and it'll be 13 to 14 Virgo. And in fact, Mercury will have just done this a few days before. So you have both of these energies in Virgo. Again, very analytical, very meticulous and organized, a little obsessive compulsive, if you want to go like to the extreme with Virgo, very controlling, right? This is a mutable earth sign. And so there is work to be done. And that's what Virgo is doing, is getting to work. So there's not exactly a lot of time for too much of anything else. And if you look at Gemini, for instance, as this is where your experimental data is collected through observation and through survey and through experimenting, Virgo is where you crunch the numbers and analyze the data. Like, you're no longer taking in new information. You are putting things together in a framework that actually is functional. That's what Virgo represents. And so it's consistent. It's not very glamorous like Leo is. It is one foot in front of the other. And to have these two energies in this quincunx also to Saturn, I think is really interesting as well, because these require some sort of internal balance. They're not going to fit together. So 14 degrees Virgo is an aristocratic family tree. It's the idea that root power is responsible for, this strength of individual character, especially ancestral roots. We have individual character, but it doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of these ancestral roots, where we've come from. And this particular degree represents like a fidelity to what that promises. We are each individuals, obviously, and we come out of a root tradition. We come out of something that came before us. This connection to Saturn, especially in Aries, kind of puts the responsibility back on the individual, despite what the root system is, because we are still, in fact, unique individuals and have our own character. You bring the contention together, the man and the woman, and the serpent is coiled. It's all potential at this point. And again, Saturn in its retrograde is the internal authority. So I think Mercury and the sun, they're in conjunct, which means that you're not going to make them fit together. You're not going to resolve the tension. You just have to live with the tension and find the balance within yourself. And I think that is going to be an important process moving through the next 2 weeks. It's going to be uncomfortable. That's what a quincunx is, right? You're gonna shove that square peg into that round hole. You're not going to abide by this internal personal authority and find a way to make that also fit with this deep ancestral root system that is kind of swaying and demanding of each of us in terms of all of our relationships. Now, the capstone here is the mystic rectangle on the 9th. And this whole corridor of September 9th through the 11th and 12th is going to be, as it usually is, a very intense moment. And that's partially because of this mystic rectangle, as I'm going to show you here in a moment. It's also Mars and Black Moon Lilith are going to be in opposition with each other. And that's going to be quite the power struggle between our personal initiative and this deep, raw power and the shadow that we often don't recognize. And with Lilith being in Capricorn, speaking of like crystallized, institutionalized authority, there's something deep there that is an authority within us that is going to create a lot of tension with acting on how we feel. Right? Because that's what Mars and Cancer is doing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to act on how we feel, especially if you feel a strong sense of cohesion and emotional bonding, with our family or with our home or with where we're from. But also, too, if that feeling and that root system is already corrupted, it's not going to be very functional, is it? And that takes us back to the Saturn in Aries energy, which is that there is an inner responsibility and reassessment of our inner authority in terms of our responsibility as individuals, okay? And that's something that I've been really grappling with in regards to this particular trial, is where does our personal accountability start and end, and where can we expect the societal factors or, a larger institutional factors to be responsible for our personal behavior? I mean, these are all questions that I think we all should be asking ourselves right now. So Mars and Lilith in this opposition are certainly going to bring this up. But as you can see on the 9th, this mystic rectangle is already building. And the primary oppositions within it are the nodes of the moon, right? So the trajectory of the soul, but Venus and Chiron. And Venus will be in Scorpio when this is exact, okay? As I talked about earlier with the millennials having a really hard time with Chiron in Taurus, Venus coming into Scorpio is not an easy placement for her. This is where she's at her detriment, right? Because Venus, number one, is at home in Libra. So the idea of aesthetics and balance in relationships and harmony and symmetry are all Venusian qualities because it represents harmony, right? It represents actual balance in the things that are meaningful to us, which is relationships. When Venus comes into Scorpio into her detriment, she basically is sinking like in the swamp of the Seven of Cups. The truth of what is generated, the potential for betrayal when we have trust involved, is not something Venus wants to sink into. This is why Venus and Scorpio is very difficult. So this opposition with Chiron is going to be one of the big things about this mystic rectangle, which of course is where we are surrounded by opportunities for transformation. And if we're going to talk about Venus and Chiron like this, I mean, there's a big healing element that's going to be part of this as well. And so this is also taking us up to the new moon and to September 11th as well. The new moon on the 10th with the sun conjunct the moon in Virgo is in itself pretty intense, but also Uranus is going to station retrograde. Mercury is going to come into Libra, and Venus is going to come into Scorpio as well. So this is a very intense moment for all of us, and we are going to start moving forward out of this fog of this eclipse corridor. Once we get to this point, I would say here, Uranus retrograde happening at the new moon as well, along with this mystic rectangle. I mean, there's certainly going to be some things that come out of this that they're going to be, a lot of wounding in terms of relationship and betrayal and intimacy and trust issues that go along with getting into any type of relationship. is going to come up, and it's going to be one of the main components of this mystic rectangle. But like I said, there's going to be opportunities for support and transformation surrounding it that is going to be part of this next lunar cycle. And we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get to that point. Uranus stationing retrograde is always a fun time. There's always some sort of about face. 6 degrees of Gemini is drilling for oil. And so you can imagine that there's something that changes with your ambition to get deeper and extracting more. And it could be information, it could be ideas, it could be just a level of consciousness. And then Uranus stations retrograde and it's like, oops, nope, I'm going to change that entirely. And you're looking at September 11th. So you never let a good disaster go to waste. And certainly if you can trigger that disaster, it's even better. So these are exactly the type of transits that are utilized in order to further along some sort of agenda in order to destabilize people. So we'll see what happens. But you can probably rest assured that there will be some measure of about face on September 11th, right after the new moon in Virgo with this Venus-Chiron opposition. All right, friends, I think that'll do it for this full moon. Partial lunar eclipse catalyst forecast. So if you're interested in anything I have to offer, you can go to my website and check it out. If you want to sign up for Catalyst membership or just see what it's all about, that's also linked in the description box below. And you can get all the information you need from my website if you are interested in the full 6-month eclipse seasonal forecast. If you are on my email list and you're interested in getting a 50% off discount code, that should be in your inbox. If you have any questions, concerns, feedback, comments, you know how to get a hold of me. You can always comment, share, like, subscribe to this channel and to this content. My email is in the description box below as well. And thank you so much for your attention to this matter. I appreciate you all so very much. It's good to be back. It was nice to have no workflow for a week, but it's also really nice to be back in the flow of something that I love to do so much, which is astrology and intuitive reading. So take care, everyone. Enjoy the full moon as best you can. Please take very good care of yourself and your mental health as best you can, your emotional health. Do what you need to do to stay grounded, to stay aligned with some measure of inner authority. Don't be afraid to reassess some things that you thought you had solidified. Right? We still have some time with this Saturn retrograde to reassess those internal foundations and authorities and structures. And don't be afraid to change your mind, right? That's the mark of a truly intelligent person. So, all right, friends, thank you for everything. I'll talk to you soon.